Good morning, everyone. Great to see so many of you here, bright and early, bushy-tailed, full of coffee, I hope. So thank you all for coming here this morning to what I hope is what will be a really interesting panel with a really fantastic group of panellists here. I was sort of going through the questions this morning, and there's a lot that we can pull apart from various perspectives. So really great to be here. So the context for this panel is that our region, the Indo-Pacific, is at the front line of this climate crisis. The need for food and water security alongside economic resilience is paramount for this region, and countries are prioritising supply chains and disaster risk management. So this panel is going to explore strategies, it'll explore partnerships, networks for financing climate adaptation, expanding access to critical resources and addressing regional vulnerabilities through cross-sector collaboration. So a lot to get through in the next 50 minutes. The way we're going to do things is that I have a few questions for my panellists, and then at the end, if we have time, we'll open up for some Q&A. So get your questions ready. We'll collect some questions and then put them to the panel. We probably only have one round, given the time. So enough of me talking. So let's kick into things. The first question I've got for the panel is how can the Indo-Pacific build resilient food and water systems that can withstand the increasing pressures of climate change? And I'd like to start by going to Sylvia and asking what your view on this is from the German perspective, who is engaging quite a bit in this region bilaterally.
Thank you very much. So, as a panelist from Germany, Europe, and not coming from the Indo-Pacific region, I first want to say that we also face, I think, the same effects of climate change, but for sure in Germany or in Europe, not as strong as in the Indo-Pacific region. And although there is no one size-fits-all solution for the problems we have, I think it's very important that we find solutions together and that we learn from each other how we can handle with the climate change. And looking to the agriculture system and the food system in Germany, we follow the concept of agroecology as the one principle to make farming resilient to the climate change, but on the other hand also to make farming a part of the solution for climate change. And for that, the principle of agroecology is also the leading principle of the work we have, of the bilateral work with countries all over the world. And also we have a big project in India or with India to find agroecological solutions for the Indian farming systems. Because we think that making the soil more healthy, working in organic matter with organic farming systems, having crop rotation, or working with agroforestry systems, it makes the agriculture more resilient for the changing of the weather. And so it's also important to save the production on the farms and to save food security all over the world.
Thanks, Sylvia. And I suppose, you know, the key point there is it doesn't matter if you're in Germany, it doesn't matter if you're here in India, we've got to find ways to be working together on these shared challenges. Claire, coming from an ADB perspective, can you talk about what's unique about your approach here?
Yeah. Hi, good morning, everybody. So I think from the ADB perspective, we have a multi-sector approach toward this issue. Because if you look at the number, about 300 million people in the region are what we call food insecure. And you have 75% of farmers who depend on agriculture for their livelihood. So it's a social issue as well as a climate issue. So we have this multifaceted approach that we have developed. And for the food sector, it means three things. First, acting on productivity. I think that's a bit what Sylvia touched on, with high efficiency agricultural inputs. So you can play on high quality seeds, fertilizer, or improving farm equipments that are critical components of climate-smart agriculture. You can also develop these seeds that are drought tolerant, for example. And so that's one aspect that we can play on through policy, but also through private sector financing. The other aspect is sustainable farming models. So promoting sustainable farming models such as greenhouse horticulture, forestry, crop rotation, aquaculture is also crucial. And for that, we also need to invest in supply chain because there is a lot of loss along the supply chain. And that makes the whole chain not efficient at all. So at ADB, we also think that investing into connectivity, like rural road construction, is key to address this issue. But also food distribution, storage, agri-logistics. So we're really looking at each aspect of that chain. And then the last one is the nature-based solution, as you were touching on, with the agroforestry, regenerative agriculture, etc. And in Asia, there is no policy on agroforestry right now. So that's really something we can play on to have a policy on that. Maybe a bit of corporate presentation. For ADB, we have an agricultural plan. We deployed about 14 billion between 2022 to 2025 for the agriculture sector resilience. Out of this, 25% is for the private sector development, because once again, policy is great, government can do a lot, but without private sector actors going into the sector and enhancing the system, there will be no change and no improvements. There is also a collaborative effort, so maybe I'll mention just one, but for example, around knowledge sharing, so we held some workshop with the Ministry of Agriculture of Japan, because we want to learn more about the application of innovative technologies in agriculture. And this kind of workshop, then other countries can learn how a country like Japan or even Germany are doing, because they are more advanced in this kind of smart technologies. And just one word on water, because water security, when we think about water, we think about drinking water, but actually 75% of the water consumed in Asia is for agriculture. So right now we see that by 2030, the demand for water will exceed supply by 40%. So because 80% of water is used for agriculture, this will hamper food production and security. So for us, in the project we are looking at with our approach, we try to promote projects that use less water, reuse water, and that have like rural flood protection. And last but not least, I just want to mention wastewater, because agriculture is one of the key producer, if I might say, of wastewater, because you have animal excretion, you have a lot of wastes, and there is a need for policies and to address this issue as well. Because if you can retreat the wastewater and reuse it, like Singapore is doing, for example, then you can save a lot of water as well. So maybe I'll stop there. I spoke a lot, sorry.
That's okay, thanks Claire. Okay, so I'm just going to do a little bit of a pivot away from I guess regional cooperation and double down onto, I guess, climate smart agriculture specifically. And I'd like to hear from a couple of our panelists about what's happening in this space and how climate smart agriculture can really contribute to building food systems, more resilient food systems in the region. So I'll start with Nilanjan to see what your thoughts are on this.
See, at the very outset, in fact, we have to get out of this mindset that water and food are positively linearly related. No. The present practices suggest that you can achieve food security with much more judicious use of water. Let's take the example of the Middle East. The best agricultural practices actually emerged out there. Suppose, say, whether you talk about the Benassa, Israel, Jordan, think about this, that you have a food demand, you cannot produce water-consuming crops. You create a water budget in the process. that if this is the total water demand in order to meet my total citizenry needs in the context of food, in the context of urban water or whatever. On the other side, this is the supply side, defined purely in terms of the physical availability of the resource. So how do I meet this need? Eventually, the water budgeting consisted of virtual water imports. That is, what is the water embedded in agricultural crops? So if I'm importing those water-consuming agricultural crops within the system, then I'm virtually bringing in water into my system and meeting that demand with that virtual supply. Now, in the process, they developed various kinds of other innovations. We talked about regenerative agriculture, talked about the agro-ecosystem. Definitely, if you think about the entire supply chain, food supply chain, starting from the soil health, the ecosystem health, to the end consumer, how does it enhance the total value? First of all, when you are releasing more water in stream by using less water, shifting to less water consuming crops, you are enhancing first of all, the ecosystem services, because the water left in stream is providing, supporting, and other provisioning services of the ecosystem. Moving towards regenerative agriculture or other forms of agriculture enhances soil health and enhances the sustainability of the agro-ecosystem. On the other side, you are producing more nutritious crops, given the fact that this has led to a more sustainable food production practice. At the same time, you're creating a sustainable value chain. You're enhancing farmers' income. This has been proven, in fact, in one of our experiments in the Upper Ganges Canal, where we showed that when we are moving towards a regime called the environmental flows regime, defined in terms of using less water and green water practices, releasing more water in stream, the farmer's income has increased by almost 25%. Whereas the ecosystem services values are also increasing in the process, leading to better conservation practices, especially in for the context of the dolphins and some other species as well. Now, on the other side, how do we get into this? We have to create certain incentives. One of the incentive structure has been produced, in fact, in this particular report, in the context of how we get into green water practices, this Bisleri and ORF report that I'm referring to, through land leveling, through drip irrigation, through other forms of practices, and eventually, if that saved water which is going in stream can be valued, and the farmers can be provided with that credit, right, which they can sell and earn an extra money from the market. If we can create that credit market, that incentivizes that entire process of moving towards regenerative agriculture or green water practices or other forms of practices. One very important intervention that has happened from the government of India is, this is from the CACP, that is the Commission on Agricultural Costs and Prices, is through the MSP mechanism, minimum support price mechanism to the farmers. Between the 1980s and the 90s, the minimum support prices of the water-consuming crop, especially paddy and wheat, sugarcane, they were increased, in fact, manifold as compared to the drier crops like the millets. Now, from 2018 onwards, we find that the MSP of the millets, and that actually changed the acreage, that entire terms of trade or the acreage actually changed towards those water-consuming crops in the 80s and the 90s, aggravating some of the interstate water conflicts in this part of the world, including international water conflicts, transboundary water conflicts between Bangladesh and India and the Tista Basin, in one of the basins, in fact, in the northeastern part of India. Apart from that, we also have some of the other conflicts in this part of the world. We had a similar situation prevailing in the United States of America of the Western US because of alfalfa hay production. Now, when the terms of trade were changed from 2018 onwards, and we also had the International Year of Millets, in fact, in 2022, I mean, given the fact that this less water-consuming crops are being promoted, it is not that we are finding the impacts immediately, but this is, of course, going to be an impact which we are going to see in the medium and the long run, because it is not that the agrarian practices change instantaneously. Crop patterns do not respond to prices almost instantaneously. They respond, in fact, almost in a 3 to 5 year cycle. So we hope that things are going to change by 2026, 2027, and we might see a shift towards this drier, more nutritious, and more remunerative crops for the farmers, and eventually leading to a change in the water practice, given the fact that 85 to 90% of the water, especially in southern parts of India, is getting into water-consuming crops like paddy.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Nanjan. And congratulations on your book. Everyone can get a copy outside later. I'm looking forward to having a read of what you've got to say in there. So a slightly different perspective on the same issue, Rob. You're in the private sector, you're in the agri-science space. What are the big trends? What are you seeing around the world?
Yeah, thanks, Erin, and good morning, everybody. Yeah, we spend a lot of time with farmers across the region, but around the world, and a lot of the trends that we're talking about today are what our farmers are most concerned about, and that's water scarcity, labour shortages, and climate change. Whenever we talk to farmers, especially climate change is something that is a prevailing concern, and they're looking for support, they're looking for services, they're looking for technology to help them deal with some of those prevailing changes. We've talked a lot about water. In this region, one of the great examples we've seen of a climate smart ag shift is the move from transplanted rice to direct seeded rice. It's not an easy shift for growers. It takes a lot of change. One of the biggest challenges they have is the management of weeds, which is a concern for growers. But we know the growers who do make that shift, and we've seen this in countries like Vietnam, China, Japan. It's a 30% reduction in water usage and a 50% reduction in methane emissions. But it does need a lot of support. Farmers need to be serviced, advised, supported with technology through that process. And we see in India, the northern states, they're making some big efforts to make that shift in Uttar Pradesh, Punjab and the north. But again, the farmers need that support to make the shift. When we listen to growers and they talk to us about climate change, one of the big concerns is heat tolerance. So we talked about heat tolerant crops. There are some traditional conservative breeding practices where, especially with crops like corn, through collaboration, we're working either in Pakistan or India or across the region, having spring corn varieties that are very exposed to heat stress at flowering, and that's when you see most of the yield impact. Having varieties that actually tolerate that high stress heat. And that's very important to growers when they're thinking about stability of production, yield, through a very variable and an uncertain climate for them. And I think the final opportunity there's many technology opportunities around, but one is trying to shift and open up production areas for growers that don't exist today. And one example is mustard in India. It's a very important crop for the Indian government. It's part of the edible oil policy, which is very important. Mustard's a key oil crop. It's mostly grown in northern Western India because that's the climate where it's best produced, and it requires good moisture levels. Through breeding technologies, we can actually open up opportunities for eastern farmers to grow mustard as well. And that's through very short season varieties, short stature varieties. So mustard can be grown in a different climate with some breeding advances, which allows different growers to actually have the opportunity to grow that crop, add to the production areas for India, and actually support the government with the edible oil policy. So there's a lot of climate smart ag technology options out there, Erin, but there's just a couple to share.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So I'm sort of hearing a lot here about, policy is one thing. You can have good policy settings, but you also need private sector, you need funding. So let's move to how we actually do that from an innovative financing perspective. What are some of those models that are needed to be able to support these efforts, when it comes to climate change? Lisa, do you want to jump in on this one?
Yes, thanks, Erin. Let me just say at the outset that France is part of the Indo-Pacific. I think that's an important point to say that through our overseas territories in the ocean, Indian Ocean and in the Pacific. So we basically face the same challenges in this region, in particular regarding climate change and resilience, globally speaking, and food and water security in particular. And one message as well, before I answer the question, is I strongly believe that there is a continuum between adaptation, resilience, disaster management, and development, particularly if we talk about vulnerable communities. I mean, if someone is really on one of the poorest community, anything that you will do will increase its resilience. And it's very important not to split any financing into this one is adapted, this one is not. At a point, there is a continuum. I'm saying that as a public development bank. Now, coming to the questions, financing models. There's no magic money. Of course, there will be a need of public and private investment, and we're trying to demonstrate that there is a business case for adaptation, but which is on the long term. Usually, you may have heard about this. We say that it's a figure from the World Bank. Every dollar invested in resilience today is $4 that are saved in the long term, which means that to some extent we have to provide the incentives to the private sector as well for this. Now, what I would like to emphasize, and the message that I would like to carry in that part on financing, it's not corporate, I want to enlarge this, is the role of public development banks. There are more than 500 public development banks across the world. Some are national, some are regional, just like ADB, the colleagues here sitting. And I strongly believe that they are the sort of missing links to drive the investment of the private sector to create some tractions towards investing in adaptation and resilience. And they have the capacity to do that kind of blended approach where together you put financing and technical assistance, as Robert was just mentioning, which is so needed. So to create a case, the investment case for any farmers, for any actors at all levels of the society to invest in what is a resilient system, which is not only investment by investment. How do you plan? How do you diversify your activity? How you provide the technical support? How you provide as well risk-sharing mechanisms for actors. So the role of public sector, public development bank in the water sector and in the agriculture sector. And on this, I want to mention an initiative that has been supported by EFD since now 5 or 6 years, which is Finance in Common Summit, which is just the idea of putting all these development banks together in a platform and share expertise and knowledge and create some coalitions and alliance between the bank to advocate and to share expertise and alliance. Now, this just bring me to the second part of your questions on partnerships. Specifically in the water and the food sector, we have been supporting, but not alone, together, for instance, with Banobras, which is a big development bank of Brazil, a water coalition of public development banks, whereby there is some commitment to say, hey, this is important, we have to invest in A, B, C, D, and we share what is working, what is not working. And we try to work, for instance, in the region with PTSMI in Indonesia or with the Vietnam Development Bank. So just putting that together. The same happens for agriculture. The Ag PDB platform was also launched in October 21 in Rome, which is also co-led by IFAD. So again, on financing, no magic finance, but the idea is that we need banks, development banks with their mandate to take the lead in the financing of adaptation, which doesn't go so easily. It's just not like renewable energies, which is very easy to finance because there is a financial case. So, but where we have to put some more efforts.
Lisa, I really like what you say. I think it might be quote of the morning. There's no magic money. Okay. However, you did mention the ADB and the role of the ADB. No pressure, Claire. But I think more broadly the multilateral development banks and regional development banks and so on. So what are some of the things that you're doing at the ADB in this space?
Yeah, no, I think so I come from the non-sovereign operations of ADB, so more the downstream part. And indeed, financing renewables now is very mainstream. But if you think about it, 10, 15 years ago, we financed the first solar project in Thailand. It was super innovative. So I think this is also evolving in the way we see the agricultural sector. So what we do, we try to lay the foundation for the private sector to enter into the sector. And we do that through technical assistance. So, for example, we have provided technical assistance in Mongolia or for dairy or cashmere industry, just to prove that, to help them reach some standards or some efficiency. And then we can get, after the technical assistance has been deployed, when it's ready for private sector financing, then we come in and we finance it on the private sector side. The other thing we do is create the feedback loop between private sector and public sector. So because we are interconnected, we have these ongoing dialogues with government. We go to specific country and we organize dialogues to make sure that the private sector can feed back to the governments to the agencies what they need on the ground. So they can act on concrete feedbacks and help, create policies, for example, that can downstream, help these companies invest more in the countries. The thing is, we also try to do some, I would say, lobbying, but it's not the right word, but create incentives for example, for certain mechanism like agroforestry or financing mechanism. You can do that through public policy-based loan, for example. We also have financed actually over 15 projects in the sector, on the private sector side, in the past 5 years. So it's quite a success, actually. Most of the investment is through financial intermediary, so FIs, because they can target SMEs, or they can do microfinance to farmers. So you go the indirect way, but we're doing more and more direct financing through, for example, improving the equipment for the farms, and stuff like that. Last but not least, we also have all these knowledge partnerships. So, for example, we are having this partnership with the Consortium of International Agricultural Research Centers. And we are discussing about the improvement of the technologies, scaling up innovative technologies and solutions, address also the biodiversity conservation, etc. I just want to mention a point that was not talked about earlier, but it's also about the farmers who grow livestock. So, the demand for meat in the region is actually increasing. And this is also an issue, and this is weighing a lot on the water demand. And so there is a whole lot we can do on the policy side or advocacy side to encourage plant-based alternative, other diets, encourage, governments to act on this as well. Because this is one of the key things that also will impede the sustainable food systems.
Claire, that's super interesting. You mentioned that about protein and meat. A little anecdote, about 10 years ago, one of my students here worked on an alternative proteins product back at Monash University. So, this has been an ongoing huge issue. As, people become wealthier, demand for meat goes up as well. So, look, I've got one more round of questions to go, and then I'd like to open the floor to you all. We'll round up maybe 2 or 3 questions from you. So please start to think about what they might be. So final question for you all from me is, how can regional governments, business, civil society strengthen collaborative networks to enhance supply chain and resilience, supply chain and economic stability and mitigate disaster risk? Can't get my words out this morning. I need more coffee. I'm from Melbourne. I need more coffee. So I'm going to throw this open to the floor here, if there's any of you that you would like to jump in on this particular question. But what can we do to increase this resilience here? Yeah.
Do you mind if I start?
Go for it, Rob.
Right. The thing that I love about working in this region is the numbers. They're always astounding. When you grow up in a country of 25, 30 million, you come to Asia, and you start to hear numbers like we have 500 million smallholder farms on less than 2 hectares. The complexity of managing that is mind-blowing. And it's more about how do you scale up and how do you bring awareness to technology change or different ways of farming quickly. It's very, very complicated. So I always look at Asia, because no single government, company, industry solves the problems. It has to be done through collaboration and partnerships. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. Each stakeholder brings a part of the puzzle. You work together to complete the trick. It's the only way that we see it work. And we see some really good examples of that around the region. One I think is of particular interest is here in India, the Farmer Producer Organization, the FPO organization. It's a stated intent of the government to have 10,000 FPOs across the country. And they can, if they function well, play a very important role to smallholder farmers, bringing together services, technology, support, credit, inputs, give farmers access to markets to improve their profitabilities. And we work closely with FPOs across the country. It's still an evolving space, but we see some great examples of farmers moving from very low quality produce and information, now bypassing markets and middlemen to increase their profitability, but also able to progress their yields and their products by better access to credit, irrigation, and support. So I think there's some really good collaboration opportunities. I think one other example, because someone mentioned millet before. Millet's a fantastic crop. We're the leader in millet. We're very proud of that because of the role it plays in climate smart agriculture across the region. But millet is not just about good quality seed and producing more. There are supply chain issues with millet. It has a short shelf life, and a lot is lost in the supply chains. So we have a nice collaboration with the Gates Foundation and CIMMIT trying to extend the shelf life and reduce the rancidity of millet. So it's not just about the production end. The supply chain is very, very wasteful in this region because of the complexity, but there is technology through collaborations that we can improve that.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Rob. I imagine in a country like India, it's complex getting across state borders and all of that sort of piece as well. Sylvia, you look like you're reaching for your microphone.
Yeah, thank you. From a government's perspective, capacity building and knowledge sharing are extremely important for disaster risk management. And therefore, during our G7 presidency, Germany launched a new global shield against climate risks at COP27 with helps to provide and facilitate more and better pre-arranged protection against climate and disaster-related risks for vulnerable people and countries. Greater financial protection and faster and more reliable disaster preparedness and response will contribute to effectively responding to loss and damage. Germany is also committed to the new Loss and Damage Fund launched at COP28. And I think looking to the farmer perspective, I think we need a discussion in between the countries how to strengthen insurance systems for the farmers so that they really get money if they don't have a good harvest. And there are a lot of systems in the different countries, and so I think we should strengthen the exchange about good systems for the whole world.
Thanks, Sylvia. Super interesting. You mentioned the sort of there's like a social protection piece where we often talk about it in the context of employment, but not, family-owned farms and all those kinds of things when we talk about decent work. Lisa, I know you're
Yes, if you allow me just a few words on this. I mean, I believe that the Global Summit, globally speaking, are a good platform to put the emphasis on that issues. And I just give the example of this Raisina, which is initially much more of a geopolitics. And we have these various sessions on water and food security. And I think that's just an achievement because it means that this issue about climate challenge resilience is also getting at a higher place on the agenda. We have this partnership with ORF here on sustainable finance in the Indo-Pacific, SUFIP, and putting it together as well experts on this. And the idea is really to bring the SDGs agenda within that region coming back in the Pacific. And I just want to mention that the next Nutrition for Growth Summit will be in Paris in March, this month, end of this month. And this is the occasion to having together NGOs, societies, for instance, AFD will have a village of solutions together with JICA, very, very active in the region. I just want as well to mention the importance of regional organization and just to give an example of solutions. Again, I think that this word is important. We have a project with Indian Ocean Commission, so Hydromet, by which we support them to be better able to extend knowledge on the climate and to develop all the early warning system and exchange the information on climate. And this is not only for disaster, but also for agriculture management. So I really believe that regional organization can have a role to play and this platform as well.
Thanks, Lisa. You mentioned something I just want to pick up on, and it's probably a good time, Nilanjan, you might have something to say about this. This is a very collaborative panel. This is like, we can solve these problems together, we're going to work together and so on and so forth. What is the geopolitics? What is the big barriers here to cooperation and collaboration? Is there a couple of really big issues, whether it's geopolitical or something else, that we actually need to resolve to be able to do this better? Nilanjan?
If you really think of a roadblock here, it is especially when we are talking in terms of agriculture, agrarian system, talking about adaptation and resilience, let's look at this. Large parts of South Asia, which in fact we have sea level rise happening, agroecosystem getting destroyed. Many of the archipelagos, in fact, are getting vanished. Many of the islands are getting vanished in the process. Now, what we really need at this point in time is adaptation financing, adequate adaptation financing. But if you really look at the portfolio of climate financing as such in this part of the world, it is heavily biased in favor of mitigation financing. Now, why such a thing actually happens? It's also because of the fact that we do not have adequate private finance in this domain of adaptation financing. There is no perceptible ROI, return on investment, on most of the adaptation financing projects, which results in the creation of public goods. But you might not have a high economic rate of return on adaptation finance, but many of these estimates suggest that you have a very high social rate of return on adaptation finance. The Global Commission on Adaptation report of 2019, I presume, estimates that if you put in $1 for adaptation, even if it is for agroecosystem, it is going to yield you $4.2 in a decade. So that's the multiplier effect of putting money into adaptation. Now, what kind of return are we expecting? Is it only from the perspective of the food system? But suppose, say, if I create even nature-based solution, NBS that you talked about, suppose, say, mangrove ecosystem, which creates a buffer and protects the community and the agrarian system from storm surges, floods. That by itself is a protection. That by itself is a nature-based insurance mechanism that I have created, possibly paying a premium for in the form of protection of that ecosystem. So how do we create a market for adaptation in order to attract private financing? That is the key question here. Let's look at the total private wealth of the world as it stands in 2024. It's 454 trillion US dollar. Can't we mobilize 1% of that? Which cover, and that will be 4.5 trillion US dollar, which will cover the SDG financing gap totally. This is slated to rise to 627 trillion US dollar by 2027. Can't we mobilize 1% of that? That will cover 6.3 trillion US dollar.
I know there's private equity in the room here today, so, you know, just saying.
No. Well, in that case, suppose in India we have a private wealth of 20 trillion US dollar. Now, at the cost of being provocative, if I say that, okay, fine, put 1% wealth tax, people will shout at me.
Yeah, but that's because it's very unevenly distributed as well, right?
Yeah,
and so
1% of wealth, 1% of the population across the world holds 40% of the wealth.
Yeah, the 1%. Okay.
Can I just respond on
Please.
adaptation? Yep. Yeah, I think the issue on so between mitigation and adaptation is like adaptation, the financing incentives are not there. So when you look, I would say as a banker, to finance a private sector project with adaptation, as you say, the returns are not necessarily proven. So you look at cash flows and you're like, oh, how can I get reimbursed? It's not there. So that's why we have a lot of funds actually within ADB that we manage, dollar funds, to encourage adaptation into projects. So we can deploy those funds a lot on the public sector side when there are public sector tenders. We will work with government to include these adaptation features into projects. For the private sector, it's much harder. So we have blended finance tools. So we have donor money that we can blend with normal capitals. That's a way to do it, to encourage it. But a lot of time when you talk with private sector clients, they're just not interested. Yeah, because it's a lot of additional work. They don't see the short-term benefits of it, and so you need companies that are really looking forward into the future and think, okay, adaptability is one key thing for climate change rather than just mitigation, and that's the struggle we are facing right now.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Claire. Okay, we have 11 minutes for questions. Is there a roving mic somewhere that we could use? If not, you just might have... Oh, there is one? Okay, yeah, cool. Sorry, I didn't see that. We'll take one question up here, and then and we've got one over here. So we'll go here and then over to this side, yeah.
My name is Sanjeev Kumar. I come from Jawaharlal Nehru University and currently pursuing my bachelor in German study. My question is to Clara Alembic, Asian Development, if I'm correct. So you say there is no policy for agroforestry. So you are talking about, if I'm heard correct, you said there is no policy on the agroforestry. So I think there in 2018 ASEAN guidelines on agroforestry. In 2014 there is a Indian guideline on the agroforestry. Or in China there is a grain for green, if I am correct. So these are the policies. So in what term you are talking about there is no policy? And you talk about that is my first question. And my second question is, you said about the water waste management use. So what are the challenges that is facing, if we talk in the term of India, that is most of the people living in rural area, what are the challenges for the water waste management system?
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll go over here for our next question. And was there anyone else who wanted to ask a question in the room as well? We'll come over here next. Yeah, and then we'll get some responses. Thanks.
Hi, this is Wahid from Amali Asset Management. My question is regarding the water credits. Just keen to know more about the methodology and whether you managed to vet that with some of the standard setting bodies. I think it's a great value creation lever for asset managers with regenerative farming projects. And the second question is regarding indicators on liquidity and pricing of these credits. Thank you.
Thank you. And we've got one final question here.
Hello, ma'am. Hello, sir. Myself, Priya. I'm currently doing MSc in Geography. And my question to you, sir, that you talked about that we are more focusing on water-intensive crops. And India is also doing agriculture on mostly on the water-intensive crops, and the government is providing MSP for that, some of the crops. And my question is that in the southern India, we are mostly producing rice and sugarcane, right? And it is a water-intensive crop, but the water is not that much sufficient there. So what could be our approach to that? My question is that.
Thanks very much. Okay, who from my panelists wants to answer any of our questions? I think we've got Nilanjan maybe in response to that one, and maybe Claire, if you want to get your thoughts together.
On the water credits question, essentially the answer lies in the book itself. But so please go through it. On the valuation component, I can have a detailed discussion with you how we did that entire valuation exercise. It's a very interesting way. How we are looking at it is essentially in the context of the marginal product loss of the water, by way of which, because the farmer is actually not using that amount of water, he's releasing it in stream. So what is the fundamental value? The value is from the perspective of the loss. He needs to be compensated for that. But I can discuss with you later, in fact, during the coffee break, on how we have done that. The methodology is entirely there. And on the basis of that, that creates the base valuation on the basis of which the market can be created. On this particular question that you are asking me, you're right. What happened was between the 80s and the 90s, there were two phenomena that were working. One was we were just that was the postmark of the Green Revolution. The entire what you call the hangover of the Green Revolution was going on, and the Green Revolution was promoted primarily for paddy and wheat. Prior to if you look at the cropping pattern, especially in Karnataka, prior to 1980s, you will find that ragi, which is a millet, finger millet, that is to dominate the acreage, in fact, in large parts of the Kaveri Basin in Karnataka. From the 80s and the 90s, you will find that the acreage pattern was shifting towards paddy in response to the promotion of paddy as a crop from the government, as also from the increases in the minimum support price regime. So the terms of trade and the acreage shifted from ragi to paddy in Karnataka. But water happens to be limited, and over time groundwater got depleted. Now, how do we actually come out of this impasse? And that resulted, in fact, in this entire Kaveri water conflict, intensification of the conflict, especially in the 80s and the 90s. Then you know that when the tribunal came up with the award, Supreme Court, in fact, revalidated and re-evaluated that award. Now, issue is that how do we actually change the cropping pattern. We have to move for a different kind of a cropping pattern. So one of the responses from the government has been that they set up this water tribe, what you call the Kaveri Water Management Authority. Now, on the other side, the MSP, minimum support price regime, has also been made to change. It is changing ever since the last 7 years. And it is shifting towards promoting these drier crops like the millets. So now one needs to see whether, in fact, the third crop of paddy, which was produced during the summer, which was completely irrigated, whether that acreage is largely shifting towards millets. Slowly it is happening, but it has not happened, in fact, with any kind of a big bang, or suppose it hasn't happened very suddenly. So it needs, first of all, awareness of the farmers and these types of pricing incentives. And also, in fact, if it can create, say, a market mechanism like the water credit system, that you release water in stream, and then you are going to compensate it through the credit market, that also helps the process.
Thanks, Nilanjan. Claire, did you want to answer the question that was put to you earlier?
Yeah, I think what I meant on agroforestry policy is not just a guidance note, it's more a comprehensive policy, including establishing baseline, certification of sustainable products, really giving incentives to farmers to switch to that method. And that's not there. Maybe that's there in one country or two in the region. It's quite a big region. But generally speaking, it's still considered as a new way of farming that is not heavily developed. And we think that government can do more on that front. The water question, I forgot.
Water waste management. You talk about the water waste management, and what are the challenges? If we talk about in terms of India, most of the population live in the rural area. So on that context, water waste management.
Oh, the waste management. Sorry, the waste management. Yeah. So I'm not sure I understand the question.
The question is.
Oh, yeah, I'm not sure on that point, sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have approximately 3 minutes. So if there's one more question, these hands go up now, we'll go to this question over here. We'll squeeze that one in before they kick us off stage, which they will do.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm Daksha from Chatham House. So thank you for your remarks, really interesting. It's good to see how, there's a role of government and civil society and development banks on how to deal with water issues. But when it comes to private sector, what I understood was that they're on the receiving end, that not being proactive in dealing with adaptation issues because they are looking at profits. So what measures can be taken to explore the materiality of water issues and food security in a way that the private sector could also be pushed to work on it proactively rather than relying on government policies or restrictions that come with them.
Rob, is that a question for you? Perhaps.
Yeah, it's a complicated question, and I guess as the private enterprise spokesperson, I'll take a run at it. We always operate from our perspective with the farmer in mind, but we're running private enterprise, so we are thinking about the financial sustainability of that business. Each country we're also working within a government framework. So there's obviously regulations, rules, and collaborations and partnerships that we want to operate with and within. As I said in my previous comment, government is absolutely critical in developing Asia, just because you're dealing with so much complexity and you're dealing with so many numbers, and you're dealing with very large social issues and food security issues and climate issues. So the breadth of complexity across all of those areas is very, very challenging. There's no way private enterprise can operate without government support or acknowledgement or collaboration. It's just, to be successful, it's the only way we believe you can operate in these environments. It's never perfect. There's always challenge, there's always discussion, but there has to be a close partnership between the two to be successful in these markets.
Thanks very much, Rob. Sylvia, you're right. Did you want to respond to that at all as sort of the government, the spokesperson for government, all governments everywhere? Do you have a different response to that at all, or is it this is a very collaborative, not very controversial panel here, which is great. But does government have a slightly different angle? Do they see this issue differently?
First of all, I think
your microphone is off. Yeah.
First of all, I think in agriculture we have the big advantage that adaptation and mitigation is always getting together. So I think that the private sector also works in adaptation to climate change because they need the adaptation to save the harvests at least. So. Perhaps I'm not so critical as you mentioned in the view of it, because I see that the private sector is already starts financing the adaptation issues, and but for sure we need more money, and for that, for example, in the COP27, the FAST initiative was bring to the market, you already mentioned it, that is really focused to the transformation of agriculture. And there, again, it's both. It's mitigation and adaptation that is financed from that. And now the FAO in Germany supports that, will bring this system more to get more finances in it. And I think the second point is that especially looking to the natural risk management systems, like you mentioned, we have to think together the financing for biodiversity measures and for climate adaptation. And there are some new good agreements all over from the global perspective, and I think we have to look how to think the both issues together.
Thanks very much, Sylvia. That is our time up. We will, as I mentioned, we'll bleed everything out of our session. Every minute will be taken, every 30 seconds. But thank you all so much to what was a really, really interesting panel. And there's obviously just so much scope here for collaboration, cooperation, new models and ways of doing things. So thank you all so much for your insights and expertise. And thank you to ORF for having us and for not telling us to get off the stage just yet. But no, thank you very much. And thank you all for getting here so early in the morning and being an enthusiastic audience as well. Thanks, everyone.